I'm sitting down my first day on the job, and she says to me, we hired a company to do a survey, and they've told us that this urban music's not going to work. I go, why? Because there's not enough of you here.
When you said you can't censor people's culture, how much was that happening?
And when you don't have purveyors of culture within that system, it'll get lost. And it just becomes homogenous. There's just going to be no life. For me to convince you to do that, you can't learn that. And they don't give out degrees for it. We're selling art here. Art, it's living, breathing. There's a lot of stuff surrounding it. If you can go to bed easy and wake up enthused and excited.
Welcome back to the U Potential Podcast. Today, I'm excited for my conversation with Craig Mannix. He's a 40-year veteran of the Canadian music industry who promoted artists such as Sean Paul, one of the biggest selling artists in the country. He co-founded Canada's Black Music Business Collective and spent his career fighting for culture when everyone else wanted to sell off. This conversation, it's really about trusting yourself when the world keeps telling you not to. You will hear this over and over in Craig's story, and it's fascinating to hear how he dealt with each of these different situations. So if you've ever talked yourself out of something, but you knew you shouldn't have, this conversation is going to be insightful for you, I promise. Before we get into this episode, if you can hit subscribe on YouTube so you get notified when next conversations come about, please do. Or subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And now, I hope you enjoy this fascinating conversation with Craig Mannix. Craig, welcome to the show.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have a good conversation with you. I hear wonderful things about you.
Yeah.
I think we should start with golf, of
Okay.
all things.
Okay.
Not just golf,
Yeah.
but I would like to talk about the first time you golfed with your son
Right.
and what was so meaningful, or what do you remember the most that day?
Well, it was this past summer, and it was a culmination of a 2-year plan that I set in place when I put him in golf lessons and golf camp 2 years ago. And when I finally brought him out with a couple of my buddies, and we played, and he enjoyed it. I felt just joy, just playing this game with him that I love so much, and knowing that hopefully it's something that we're going to be doing for the rest of our lives together.
The way you said joy, your eyes lit up.
It's because golf itself kind of captured my life, and I was like, I need to share this with my son. And being an older dad, I was like, I'm not going to put on skates. I'm not going to play basketball. I'm not going to do any of that stuff with you, but I'll golf with you. And so that's what we did.
Nice.
Yeah.
I've played golf, and I know it requires a lot of patience,
Yes.
a lot of time on the course.
Uh-huh.
It makes me think of fatherhood. Lots of patience, lots of time with the kid.
Yeah.
You said older dad.
Yes.
I'm a father too, and I think kids are the best.
Yes.
How has being a father influenced you the most?
It's the greatest feeling. I say it's my greatest accomplishment. It's the first time in my life I realized I'm living for someone else instead of myself. And there's something to that. And you look at that child, and that child is your legacy. So, I want him to be his own person, but I want to instill as much of as me, value-wise and stuff like that, onto him. Personality is his own, but I want to make sure he knows stuff and he learns stuff, and he's getting that stuff from me. And I just love talking to him now and just having conversations and watching sports and just, talk about life.
Yeah. I have a 6 and 9-year-old, so similar ages.
Yes.
You get to that point where you get to talk to them. Like,
yes.
In Toronto here, I did a podcast with a guy named John Verhage, and he talked about how raising a kid is like one of the last versions of agape, this undeniable sense of love where nothing else matters except for that kid, despite how challenging being a father is.
Right.
Waking up in the middle of the night, like it makes your at moments happiness plummet, but yet it's just this undenying feeling of total, I guess, surrender of love. And isn't it amazing? That's more of a comment, but
It's an amazing thing, and parents would tell me that, like that kind of stuff, before I became a parent, and I didn't really understand it. And I was like, the minute I became a parent, I understood it. It was like I was talking to, when I was becoming a dad, I was telling some people, I was talking to an A&R, well, a big executive that I know, Imran Majid, and he had told, when I mentioned it to him, he said, you know what, man, because I was an A&R person, he goes, your world's going to change. And I said, well, I know I'm going to be a parent. He goes, no. You're going to look at things differently. You're going to see things different. You're going to hear things different. Colors will be, everything will be different. And I was like, really? And I didn't quite understand, but kind of the minute you become a parent, you get it. And I got it. And I look at things in the world and things differently because I just don't think about it affecting me. I think about it affecting my family. Right? So that's all a part of it. But it's positive, man. It's great.
Oh.
Nothing better than having a little person call you dad.
No kidding, dad. That just, hey, dad.
Hey, dad.
What do you think of this, dad? What do you think of this?
What do you think?
I have all the time in the world for all the dad questions.
Hey, dad. And, thank God in this era, some of the questions can be answered by Alexa or Google that I don't have the answers for. So my son he'll ask me first. And I go, man, I don't know. He goes, we'll ask Alexa. Good idea. Let's ask Alexa. Yeah. So it is what it is.
It's amazing. So you talk about it changed your lens, how you see things.
Yes.
You're a guy who loves music.
Yes.
I understand music shapes the large part of your life.
Yes.
How has being a father, how it changes your lens, how you see things? How has music changed since being a dad, if anything at all?
It's made me want to share more music with him. I'm always trying to, hey, listen to this, listen to that. But I realize he's going to listen to what he's going to listen to. But I just want to make it available for him. Early on, I tried to force some of my musical tastes on him, but it just doesn't work that way, man. It doesn't work. So I kind of backed off of that. But the music itself it's everything to me. It surrounds me. I need to hear it. I need to feel it. I need to see it. Music and music culture is everything to me.
So what is music, and then what is music culture? If you could, if you had to give a definition.
Okay, so music is what you listen to, is what you hear, what's the recorded thing. The culture is what surrounds that music. It's the lifestyle. It's the lifestyle around the music is the culture, and that's what being entrenched into that is how you know what's going on, right, in the scene. Right. So, you get an idea of what's bubbling or what people are listening to, or, my whole thing is when I'd go see an act or go see artists, of course I pay attention to the artists on the stage, but a lot of times, half the time I'm looking around the room, right? I'm trying to see how many people are singing along, how many people know the words, try to decipher, is this just a room full of friends, or is it are they legitimate fans? And take an eye on the merch table, see how things are moving there, and just to see how solid of an artist proposition it is, because we're in an era of a lot of bedroom artists, right? Because of technology and because of streaming, because of the ease to, release music. There's no longer those barriers by the labels, because you can do stuff. Pardon me. You can do stuff on your own.
Yeah, and it seems like it's one of the things that give music such richness is the culture, the depth, the layers to it. Whereas we start to remove some of that culture, music might not hit the same.
It won't hit the same because it's built out of the culture, right? Yeah. It's you see, but it's like things got too big. Like the festivals got too big, like they're shrinking, like they're coming more bespoke and stuff like that. It's people are going, because the music has been, for lack of a better term, it's just been kind of watered down.
Yeah.
A lot of the mainstream stuff, and it's just, and once you have people handling it that don't respect the culture around it, it just becomes
Noise almost.
noise, and to a lot of those folks, they might as well be selling widgets or Swiffers, or you know what I mean? I would always say, and it was always my big thing, I'd have to be like, guys, we're selling art here.
Yeah.
Like it's much more nuanced than that. This is art. It's living, breathing. There's a lot of stuff surrounding it. And if you do it right, yes, I do recognize there's a business to it, and I'm about the business. But if you do it right and credible, it would last longer. It will flourish. You take your time, develop, build artists. You do more artist-friendly deals. That makes everybody happy. It makes the artist want to work harder. It makes everybody in it together. But when you're so top-heavy and you're so big and you have to feed the machine, then unfortunately, that kind of stuff has to go to the wayside.
Yeah.
And that's what's been happening.
And that's where the erosion comes in, and the culture getting stripped out of the music.
100%.
It's like, I want to go into more of that, but I'm curious for you, this culture you saw in around music growing up. What was music like in your household? Was it played? Was it introduced to you like you were doing to your son?
I was raised primarily by two wonderful women, my grandmother and my aunt.
Are they tattooed on your arm?
There are tattoos, memorial tattoos of them on my arm. It's they were Blue Jay fans, and I have two Blue Jays on my arm, to memorize them and commemorate them. And they're surrounded by flowers, and one like roses and one like lilies. So that's what's surrounding them. So I definitely, I remember them, and they were good. They were great women, but at the same time, they were born again Christian. They're very staunch. So growing up for me at a certain age was very hard because, the music I was listening to was the devil's music, right? So, and you're talking about, I've always liked, as I got older, I liked lighter stuff, but I was like hard edge stuff. So when I was coming up, I liked a lot of hard rock, and then of course, hardcore rap became a natural progression for me, so I was listening to that stuff, and there's times certain albums I had would disappear when I came home, and
where did that go?
They were replaced with like Christian rock records, and
did you dig it?
No, I hated it, as everybody hated it, right? So, but which made me kind of more determined, more into the scene. So I'd listen to music intently, very quietly in my bedroom, and read the magazines and get all that information. And then when I started to be like a younger teenager, I started going out, and that was it. They couldn't stop me, right? So I really fought hard to be in it the way I'm in it, and I just love music in general. So across the board, I've been a fan from a long time, and I've always connected with it. And the older I've got, my tastes have been more eclectic. Of course, I specialize in black music, but, I know in all forms of music as just a fan, right? I'm just enamored with music and music history, and that's just a big part of who I am.
Yeah, reading about some of your stories and Steven sharing some, you could tell that you're just, the fabric of who you are is in around music. I'm wondering, if I get this right, when you were like 10, 12 or somewhere around there, you went back to where your family roots are from.
That's right, in Antigua, West Indies, yes.
What, if anything at all, did going there, seeing your family's roots, provide you with some insight of another lens on culture
Oh,
and blending that with where you're born, raised in Toronto's culture.
I got to say, my life's journey, it's almost like it was mapped out for a reason, because when I went to Antigua as a kid, not only did at first I didn't appreciate it because I was a kid from Toronto being plucked into the Caribbean. And, imagine being made fun of at school for your accent.
Yeah.
But I'm like, my accent? You guys all have accents. Right? It's just so crazy. But at the end of the day, I got to meet family, which I've never known, would have never known. I got to make friends, which I would have never had. So that was great, but it also immersed me in my culture. So I got to know Caribbean music. I got to know soca music, calypso, reggae, understanding how people operate, how the culture works, the parties, the fetes. So I got enamored. I got that education, which then helped me years later. I'm older. I'm working at Virgin Records, and I'm working for a gentleman by the name of Dean Cameron, a legend in the Canadian music industry. And, I walk into his office. I say, hey, man, I got a feeling that like reggae is going to make a comeback. Right. So he says to me, yeah. Yeah. He goes, yeah. And I said, well, there's this label, VP Records, and they have this artist named Sean Paul. And he goes, what do you think? You think it's going to? I said, yeah, I think it'll. So what had happened is turned into a bidding war for the label, with all the labels in Canada. And then so one day he says to me, he goes, okay, I'm sending you to New York with this gentleman by the name of Doug Caldwell, really good guy, ex-industry guy. And we go to New York, and I'm the kid, right? So we go to New York, and I'm meeting with this family of VP Records, which are, they're Chinese Jamaican, they're Caribbean, they're West Indian. So I'm probably the first person they sat down with that understood where they were coming from, understood their product, understood where it fit, and had a take on what I could do with it. And, we ended up getting the deal. And Canada to this day is Sean Paul's number one territory in the world per capita. Like I think like 1 out of every 10 households had a copy of Dutty Rock in their house. And to this day, I think Sean could come to Toronto and tour Canada at will.
I agree. Yeah.
So, so it's history. And and it's funny because now it's 25 years later, I'm working for VP Records again in Canada, just working with them, consulting with them, and helping them out up here too.
Yeah. So young Craig, what was it? Was it this? It was this intuition rather than what we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Looking at data.
Yeah.
Is that what?
Yeah. Young Craig has always been data and vibe and feeling driven, which is, it's not. I don't know what other way to do it. Mm-hmm. You can see, you can go after a specific type of artist and say like, well, and compare other artists in that vein. But just because, you're a rapper and you're doing a certain type of sound or style. So what I would do is data wise, they'd compare you to, 5 other like rappers. Mm-hmm. And then we'd try to, predict what your product would do, that's it. That's how it's done. And, so it's kind of like, it's still gut, but it's numbers that don't make any sense.
Yeah.
But you have to put numbers into the machine. You know what I mean? So, and that's why you always get these weird miscues and miscalculations. But once again, you're also talking about a business that runs on a 10% success rate. So there's no guarantees.
No, it's 10%, eh?
10% of signings.
Of signings, yeah.
I'm not talking about money that's generated by already owned copyright and catalog reissues and, licensing and, syncs and that sort of stuff. Like, but I'm just talking about feeding like putting new blood
Yeah.
in the veins.
So 10%, and going back to Sean Paul experience, how old were you? In 20s?
I was in my early 30s.
Early 30s.
Yeah.
You're young for the industry. These guys listen to you, even though it's only a 10% success rate. What did they see in you? What do you think, looking back? To listen to your words, they'd be like, "This guy's."
I don't know. But once again, back then the record companies were filled with experts, in whatever their field.
Yeah,
that country person lived, eat, breathed country.
Mm-hmm.
The hip hop lived like whatever, you had somebody there who knew punk rock, who knew this, who knew that, and those people lived in those worlds. The jazz folks lived in those worlds, and what the higher executives would, the company would just lean on their experts. Well, these are our experts, so is that what they say? That's what they say. So going back to Dean Cameron, he'd say to me, like, you're a visionary. You see things. You have the ability to see things. Never lose that. Never lose that thing. And he empowered you. He'd be like, go do it. Because once again, this business is about, there's a saying in golf. It was, oh my God, which golfer said it? Golf is a game of close misses.
Yeah. It really is.
So, it's almost that way in music. It's like, because the true seasoned, they knew they had to just take a swing.
Yeah.
Signing people without seeing them perform live, sight unseen, is insane. But that happens now. Right? So, once again, everybody wants the quick fix. Everybody wants the instant successful artist. They don't exist. Every successful artist you see right now, charting, blah, 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 they had a 3 to 5 year journey to get there.
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee it.
Yeah. But we see it as overnight success.
It's funny. The general public would always see it as overnight success, which is that I could I could live with. But when people within the companies are looking for that begins to be a scary proposition.
For sure. Yeah.
Right? That's scary.
Yeah, and it seems like for music, for art, for culture, you don't want you wouldn't want an overnight success. You want someone who's been
because overnight successes, they blow up and then
they're gone.
They're gone. You want to set a foundation where you're going to have a ride with an artist for decades.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, that's the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It makes me think of like beyond just music. And again, I'm thinking about your career.
Yes.
I'm always interested in this. Like you mentioned 40 years in the music industry.
Yeah.
I've read that you're a pioneer, you're a visionary,
right?
Like you said, but you're not an overnight success. 40 years.
No, I've.
No offense when I say you're not.
No, it's true. I've recognized it. I was, it took me 20 years to get to the level of a VP in this business when the last position I held, and it took all of my everybody else in the industry. There was not a VP who had taken that long. Most of them had taken 10 years. Some of them had taken less, way less. So it's like, but once again, everybody's journey is different.
Yeah.
But I also recognize the fact that me navigating the music industry was kind of doing it in my terms.
That's right.
So, and it's not like I'm insubordinate or anything like that. It's just that people knew there's certain things I would do and I wouldn't do, and I have scruples, and that's just the way I'm wired, right? I want, because what happens is when you're on the front lines as an A&R person or a creative, and you're that person talking to that artist and saying, come, bring me your art. Come sign this contract with this corporation. Come sign your life away. Like, for me to convince you to do that is a lot. You can't learn that, and they don't give out degrees for it. They don't give out they don't. It's something that either you have it or you don't. And it takes a long time to nurture. And once you do that, and then some executive who has no idea about how hard that is comes in and, is kind of being all willy-nilly and flippant, and you're just like, you don't know how hard it was for me to do this. And they trust me.
That's right, yeah.
When you're making decisions that affects them, they look to me. So I feel responsible. Right? So that's just the way I've always operated. And that's one of my mentors, Dean Cameron. He was that way. So he taught me how to treat artists and treat people, and also a lot of that is just from my own personality. I mean, I'm just not I just don't operate in that manner.
This makes me think of something that I heard about when you were, I can't remember what company, but a head of marketing, I think, came up to you in your early 20s and said, like, I don't know why we hired you, because hip hop's not going to make it in Canada.
That's right.
And from what I read, you're like, no, it is.
Yeah.
And that seems to be an early seed of that vision you had.
Oh, 100%. But because I knew how powerful the music was. I knew what it meant to people. I knew without radio play or whatever, it was selling. I knew I was going to the parties. There's a ton of people there, especially when it starts to expand and you see the kids from the suburbs coming in to the parties and trickling in. You're like, okay, this is going somewhere, right? So that person had told me when I got my first job in the business, that person had told me, the head of marketing, it's an interesting story. So my first day on the job, my first day, because you got to understand, my position was reluctant. Like, they reluctantly hired me.
Oh,
right. So Barry Weiss, who's a legendary executive in the music business, co-founder of Jive Records and Zomba, he'd come up quarterly and have meetings, and he'd say to the staff at the time, say, hey man, like, what's going on here? I'm putting out 2 short records, Tribe Called Quest records, blah, blah, blah. And you guys are bringing them as imports. So I don't know, there might be people who don't remember, but during the physical era in the 90s and the 80s, in Canada, you had the option of manufacturing a product. And if you manufactured domestically, that's the stuff that was, those are the CDs and cassettes that were $12.99, $13.99, whatever. But the imports, if you didn't want to manufacture domestically because you didn't think it would do well or you sell enough, you just import. So, but those are the ones when, you'd end up buying a cassette for $25, $30, right? And you just don't make as much of a margin. Mm-hmm. So, he would come up and be like, why are you guys importing you're importing and they're importing big numbers, like 15,000, 20,000 albums. And he's like, why aren't you making these domestically? And they kind of all shrugged their shoulders and, and he's like, his other question was, who does your, back then, urban music? And they're like, we don't have anybody. He goes, well, you need to hire somebody. Right. So that's how I got my first gig. But so to put you the mindset, so going back to that original point, so I'm sitting down my first day on the job, and she says to me, the executive says to me, she puts this folder in front of me, and I'm like, what is this? And I start looking at it, thumbing through it. I go, what's this? And she goes, it's a survey. Do you know what a survey is? I was like, yeah, I know what a survey is, but what kind of survey is this? Well, we hired a company to do a survey, and they've told us that this urban music's not going to work. I go, why? And that executive proceeded to look me in the eye and say, well, because there's not enough of you here. And I go, me? You mean dudes? like what do you mean? There's not enough black people in Canada to support this. And I'm like, so you trying to tell me that only black people listen to black music? I was like, I was, even as a young 22-year-old, I was like, what world have I got into, right? But luckily, at the time, the president of the company was an American by the name of Bob Jameson, so he kind of got it. He was like, he came from America where they had different departments and concentrated, because they're like, the American label's like, we're going to maximize in every area. Like, so, you know, so they then, thank God, they didn't listen to me, and we had success. Like, I'm talking about, and at that time, I'm talking about seminal records that could have gone, in this country, gone a completely different way. I'm talking.
What year is this approximately?
Oh, we're talking 90s. Early 90s. So just to, Wu-Tang Clan entered the 36 chambers. You know, I had to tell them, like, you need to release this. Like, Notorious B.I.G. Ready to Die. I had to tell them, we need to release this. You know, like, and they're like, you know, and of course,
sure it's gonna sell.
Yeah, and of course, I got pushback by, you know, people who had no idea of anything, and they're like, well, this Notorious Big, he seems really misogynist. I don't know if this is, or rude and violent. I don't know if it's the kind of music we should put out. And I'm like, well, it's not for you.
Yeah.
And who are you to be censoring other people's culture? And that's the dangerous part of, brings us back to the dangerous part of a record company, right? And when you don't have purveyors of culture within that system, it'll get lost. Yeah. And it just becomes homogenous, and there's just going to be no life, right? And that's what's happening now.
When you said you can't censor people's culture, it literally tingles my body.
Oh, you can't. Yeah.
And how much was that happening?
It's still happening now. I heard most recently from a friend that someone was talking to one of the top execs in this business, and and that person could not understand why. As the person was asked, why do rappers use the N-word? And, you know, and it's like, we're still having someone ask that question. Like we're that, you know, not that as a black man I use that word, but they use it as they're flipping it, right? It's a word that was created as, you know, derogatory, and they then use it and flip it amongst themselves. Doesn't mean it's for you to use, but, you know, the gay community does that with certain words, and you know, it's so I don't understand how that's hard to fathom or understand, but that just tells you how lost that person is.
Yeah.
They don't understand, right?
I can have a strong opinion about a culture, yet I actually don't exist in it, and I don't understand.
You don't understand it. You don't exist in it. It's like kind of weird. Right. Sure. And it's like, and you don't do time. And then it's like, and then the other thing I would get is, if I was in another space that wasn't traditional black music, I'd get like, what are you doing here? Or, you know this music? And I'm like, I grew up in Canada, man. Like, if you don't think I know this music, you're crazy.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's the thing. I know other culture, just because I took the time and understand and can identify with other culture, it doesn't, and you chose not to with my culture, it doesn't mean we're the same.
How, that must be so challenging to navigate.
It's wild. It's a wild scenario. Like, it's just, it's crazy. It's hard to explain. But when people come at you like that, and you don't,
going back to our golf and parenting, the patience that must take to not just poof outside the head.
You know what? I've gotten this music business. It's built on patience, but they've gotten away from it.
Yeah.
It takes time to break a record.
Yeah.
It takes time to develop an act. It takes time to get that single top 10. But, you know, once again, moving away from it. You know, marketing isn't marketing anymore. Marketing's just advertising. You know, it's not, no one's doing just digital advertising. No one's doing creative stuff. You know, they've stepped away from all that. No one wants to work.
Why work?
No one wants to do the work.
Yeah.
You know, they want to hide behind administrative stuff and filling out forms and sheets and stuff like that. But they don't, because it's easy to hide behind that stuff. But let's have a real conversation.
Hi, it's Sean. I know I'm breaking into the conversation just for a moment. There's good reason. If you're here, it means you care about living with more purpose, more meaning, and deeper connection. And that's exactly what the You Potential podcast is all about. When you hit that subscribe button, conversations like this, the ones that challenge you to think differently and open to new possibilities, keep showing up to you every week. And when you share this episode with someone you care, you're not just passing along a podcast. You're giving them a chance to reflect, to grow, and maybe even to reimagine what a good life can look like for them. So please take a second, subscribe, share it with a friend. Let's spread the conversations that truly matter. Now back to the show. It seems like your career is having those real conversations and doing the work. I'm thinking about the advance.
Yes.
Is this not the nonprofit that you started to bring voice?
I was one of the founding members.
Okay.
Okay, so I did not start it on my own, but it was, you know, it's funny because at first it was myself, a very good attorney by the name of Miro Bala, Vivian Barclay, who is a longtime music executive in Canada, and Cardinal Official. And it was, I think, years ago, maybe 10 years, maybe a little bit, maybe 7, 8 years ago, when the Junos were in Vancouver, you know, Miro came back from Vancouver and he called me and we were talking. He goes, I just came back, and I didn't go out to the Junos in Vancouver because I think it was actually because my son was being born at the same time, so I couldn't go. But he came back and he said, you know, I'm kind of sick of being the only black guy in the room that's not an artist. And I go, dude, I've been feeling that way for 30 years. Right? So then we just started meeting and talking about what we could do, and we met a couple times, and then oddly enough, like a few months after that, the whole George Floyd thing happens. So then after that, we got people paid attention. We got a voice, we got a platform, and you know, Gary Slate from the Slate Foundation and Slate Music, he called us up and he was like, "Hey man, I'm trying to give some money for black artists and stuff like that, and you know, I figure, why would it be a bunch of white guys distributing this? It should be you." And he was our first, you know, benefactor to help us start. And we've done things since during our existence. We've changed a lot of policies within companies, the internship programs and stuff like that. Before, you could only, you know, they'd only take students from like universities and stuff like that. Now we can have, you know, and then I realized, like, if I was trying to get into the music business the way I got in before, I wouldn't get in. So how is that? Because back in those days, you know, oh, you want to get into journalism, you identify someone in that business and you just bother them and say, "Hey man, could I be your intern?" And so that's what I did. But with all these rules and barriers set in place, it was getting harder and harder, because I'm also co-chair of the Remix Project, which is an arts organization for youth, and I'm like, well, we have a music business program in here. We have a producers program. We have a DJ program in here. Why can't these guys get in? Not some kid that's at Queens is like, you go up to their desk and you're like, hey man, you're here, you're interning. What's going on? How you live it? He goes, oh yeah, I like it here. I applied at Coke and I applied it, and I'm just like, you just walk around. You're like, well, one thing about the music business, the people that used to be in it wanted to be in it. Because it's a tough business and it's hard. But you know why people wanted to be in it? Because they love the culture.
Mm-hmm.
But now you have so less culture there, then what's the driving force?
Two questions here. One's a statement. The world needs more Craigs. Well,
I appreciate that.
The work you're doing with Advance and like your journey. I don't know how old you were at that point, but say 20 years, 25 years, slugging it out, breaking down those barriers so that people who benefited from Advance can have a voice.
Right.
But I hear it, there's a tension in your, like when you're talking, there's like, I love this, the culture.
Yeah.
Now we're getting to this place right now. Like I sense a bit of tension in you. Like what keeps you going when some of that culture is being stripped away?
Well, now, I started my own company, big consulting, and now I have the ability to work with who I want and how I want, and which is great. So like one of my clients is the CMRRA, which is collection rights agency for reproduction and copyright, and that's me kind of educating artists and managers and to where to find their money and how to protect their copyright and stuff like, which is great. I'm also now the marketing and promotions consultant for Canada for VP Records, so which is great because now I get to just do record stuff again, right? And
you seem like you lit up there.
Yeah, life's kind of sometimes like snakes and ladders, and sometimes you hit a snake, and I've hit snakes a lot. And I know people who have given up and changed careers and blah, blah, blah. And not to say that they gave up. Maybe they were just like, you know what, I want to do something else, which is they're right. But, when you wanted to do something since you were 17 years old and you manifest it and you get to a point where you've created a living for yourself and a name and a this, and I'm just thankful. And it's that dumb cliche, you make your passion your job. You don't feel like you work the day in your life. Last few years I felt like I was working because the passion, they were sucking the creativity out and just replacing it with process. But I always said to myself, if I lose that passion, I'll leave this business.
Right.
Because I can't be fake. Those artists that I sit down with, they deserve authenticity.
Yeah.
They deserve realness. And, I just can't be fake.
Especially when an artist is giving you all themselves.
And they just treat, some people they don't realize that thing. Like it's a lot, man. People put their all into their art and their creativity and stuff like that. And if you're going to entrust me to help you be bigger, that's a lot.
It is.
It's kind of like parenting in a way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just, and once again, I don't want to say I lost track of the business side, but business side's very important. But when you get too top heavy and too fat, and you can't, it doesn't give you that flexibility to even do creative stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing.
That's the irony.
When you lose sight of the actual point of what you're doing to be creative,
Yeah.
the business doesn't matter.
Yeah, I come from an era where we didn't put stuff in. We didn't put something out unless we are going to market it. Like, what's that? Like, how? Like, wait a minute. We have these records. We're going to put them out without marketing. We're just put them out. But now, a lot harder to do in the physical era. Digital era, you can do that, right? So then it's like, and it's hard to get discovered in that abyss.
I want to go back to the snake and ladders. We all have our own journeys that we're navigating. I have my own. We're hearing a lot of yours, which has been very insightful. I like the analogy because who hasn't played snakes and ladders?
Right.
But you're right. Sometimes when we hit a snake in life, it's hard to look for that ladder. What's kept you grounded to keep trying to find that ladder?
It's what I do. I've done other things. I've worked in fashion. I've helped out, different brands here and there. I've done stuff all around the culture. And, I just feel the passion for me is just to succeed and keep going and hit goals that I've always wanted to hit, that part of me still wants to sign that global superstar. I've been close. I've been a part of some good success, but have I signed, the next Michael Jackson? No, but it in my heart, I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
But now I think I'm back to the point where I want to be involved with it, but I want to be involved with stuff that's passionate. And I want to work with people who are equally passionate, because I do think the future of the record industry is going to be kind of more mid-level companies, and we're going to go back to more bespoke companies and even, that kind of stuff, because we've lost what it meant, like what all these companies built. Like, this, like, Sub Pop is Sub Pop what Sub Pop was anymore. It doesn't, this new release, I got to have it.
Yeah.
Is Def Jam. I used to buy things with that Def Jam label sight unseen, when you couldn't even hear it. Yeah. We're talking about a physical era, like, how are you hearing it? You're lucky if there's a play copy at the store, right? So, that kind of stuff meant something. And it doesn't mean we got to go back to that. We have to go back to that. We have to go back to building brands, building culture, getting things becoming more meaningful, and people being back to being engaged. They're not engaged.
Makes me think of like the experience of a concert. This, like, you feel like a concert, a proper concert, that you really, really enjoy the culture, or you sense the culture in there and the collective effervescence that everybody is feeling in there. It seems like these mid-level, when I say mid-level, not huge stadiums, but I see a rise in those coming.
100%.
We're desiring this, like, connection.
I would rather see an artist at a small venue than at a stadium. Any day of the week. I mean, I just saw Erykah Badu and The Alchemist at History. We're talking about 2,000 people. It was perfect. Not to mention, it was a show where they took away all electronics, so it was like almost a throwback for me, because I'm like, it's been a while since I've been to a show that I can't look at my phone, and I can just live in the moment, and I couldn't take any video. And then it just, what it did make me leaving it? I want to hear the music more and more.
Totally.
I want to hear this because I've heard these songs once. I saw the show. I can't even. There's no record of it on my phone.
Yeah.
Okay, when are you releasing it? Like that's
Yeah.
how it. That's how it really. That's how it made me feel, right? So, I think, and even parties, those the big clubs have shrunk. The people don't want to go to big club parties anymore. They want to go to smaller club parties. Like a lot of promoters and people I've talked to, they're looking for venues that hold 300 people, 400 people. They want to do more, insulated, bespoke, it's almost like a rebirth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
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 There'll be a bunch who go to the large streaming, but that's okay.
That's okay.
Find your own house.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. And there are some big level artists. I'm not against any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's like, I'm just going to say, if you want to grow into the future, I'm saying that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
Taylor Swift is not going to release an album every year, as much as they'd love her to. It's just not going to happen. And if you have to depend on that to make a good year, then you're in trouble.
Yeah. On this podcast, we explore stories like we've been doing. We look at meaning, and I can see you've lived a meaningful career. I hear it. I can feel it coming across here. We also explore the influence money has on stories, careers, etc. I'm curious, with your deep layers and knowledge of hip hop, if you had to say a relationship hip hop has had with money, how would you explain that?
The hip hop relationship with money is very interesting because it's initially it's aspirational, right? When you look at early hip hop, it's aspirational, and because it truly is a music that came from the hood, and people in the hood didn't have anything, therefore it was always aspirational, and with a sprinkling of what's going on in my life or what's going on in life, right? So then you have that aspirational beginning, and everybody's designer clothes and chains and jewelry and stuff like that, and cars, and rapping about it. But then you still also, at the same time, you have that sort of cultural conscious wave. You have early 90s, you have the influx of, the native tongues, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul, stuff like that, who weren't about any of that stuff, and so, but at the same time, you still have this aspirational thing happening. So, and that's always been a part of hip hop. Now, it's changed. Like, there's different layers of hip hop where different rappers rap about different stuff. But for hip hop, for the most part, initially it was aspirational because it was about what they didn't have.
Right.
Now it's more, well, like I said, still a part of that, but now it's more, there's more layers to it now. Now you've always had conscious hip hop. Now you have kind of underground stuff. You have, now hip hop is, 50 years old. You have people calling certain hip hop groups dad rap.
Dad rap.
And it's like, why is it dad rap? Why? Because guys are rapping about life. They're not rapping about, their ops on the street. They're not rapping about going on shopping sprees. They're rapping about family and their kids and stuff like that, which is cool, and so I think that hip hop is much more layered than people think, but immediately people will always go to the aspirational part because that's what people associate rap with, like a bunch of guys flashing, a lot of bling.
That's I'm not part of the culture, but I observe and I hear that. I'm like, yeah, I like your thing about aspirational. They're singing about things they don't have.
They don't have.
And vocalizing that.
Yeah. Now, some of them got some stuff, but they weren't educated how to handle their money. And most of them have not done as well, like, because they had a lot. They lost it. They blew it. They didn't know how to manage it, that kind of stuff. And then you have a guy like 50 Cent who listened to his investor and said, some of this money you're making, you should put into stocks and blah, blah, blah. Hey, there's a stock coming up. This up and coming stock that I think you should buy some stocks. Well, yeah, what is it? Vitamin water. Okay. So he buys vitamin water, buys a lot of stock in vitamin water early out. It was cheap. And then a year later, Coca-Cola buys them. He then becomes a 100 millionaire and starts investing in film and television. Creates an empire. I mean, that's incredible. This is a guy who I worked some of his records. This is a guy in the late 90s, didn't know if he'd be alive because he got shot 7 times. Right? So, and then you look at Dr. Dre, what he did with Beats. And then Apple buys him, and then he becomes a billionaire. It's just, Nas is doing it right now too, but he's doing his stuff through music. He started his own label, Mass Appeal, and they're doing productions and stuff like that. So these are guys that have been around from the 90s who've actually learned and have been blessed enough to have good advisors around them to take them to the next level. A guy like 2 Chainz, very heavily invested in real estate. Like there's a few. There's more than a few, but there's a lot. There's a lot of, unfortunately, that.
Mm-hmm. And it's not unique to music.
No, it's music in general. It's artists in general.
Professional athletes as well.
Professional, yeah.
Do record companies do anything to help with
like an education?
Like an education or
no? I mean, I no. There's no official education.
Not a class.
No, I would take it upon myself.
Yeah.
Personally, I would always pull an artist or a young manager aside and say, "This is what I think you should do, and this is what I don't think you should do." Like, totally, like, not. I'm not even paid to do that. Like, but not that I need to be. But it's just like I felt like I feel a responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have this. I'm going to try to tell you how to deal with it. Mm-hmm. You can listen to me or not.
Yeah.
Earlier, I talked about a tension that I kind of felt when you're talking about your career into this day when the culture was being stripped out. I can imagine a similar tension exists if you're working with a new artist where, they want to speak about their truth and the fabric of whom they are, but yet there's this other domain, the business side of it.
Yeah.
How do artists balance this?
It's hard, but I tell them they've got to.
They got to.
It's important because, one of the things, when I do these workshops and stuff for the CMRRA, and I'm talking to these artists, and it's such a frustrating thing to have an artist come up to you and say, yeah, I'm not really concerned about this stuff. It's just, I just want to make music, man. I'm like, are you crazy? Like, you have entered into a very predatory business. There's a lot of people out there who can take advantage of you. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, you need to learn the business. Like your music, I start by some of these workshops like don't even tell me what you make, what kind of art you make, because I'm not trying to talk to you about that right now. I'm trying to talk to you about getting your business straight, making sure your stuff's registered, making sure that when you do put out your art, you're going to get properly compensated and no one can steal from you and rob you.
Mm.
Right? That's just the way I feel, but it's still frustrating, even though you have all these stories, you have history of artists who have been ripped off and generationally, and you still have a new crop of artists that will tell you they don't care.
Mm-hmm. It almost seemed like it'll erode.
Yeah, and I'm like, man, if that's how you want to do this, then just be a busk. Go busk. It's a fair exchange. You're outside, you're playing, you open up your case, you get money, you take it, you go home.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's what you want, just do that. Right? So I just, yeah, I get frustrated.
Well, yeah, again, you're doing the hard work.
Yeah.
Having these conversations with young artists. You think a world can exist? Our world can exist without music informed by culture? Do you think we'd just collapse if we didn't have this beautiful art form anymore?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a scary thing to, imagine if we didn't have the Beatles. Imagine if we didn't have Bob Marley. Imagine if we didn't have, Billie Holiday. Imagine if we didn't have, like, so many artists, man. Like, it's just, imagine if we didn't have John Coltrane and Miles Davis and you're like AC/DC. Like, the list goes on.
Yeah.
Like, so I always say music is the soundtrack to life.
Yeah.
Can you imagine life with no soundtrack? What was the last movie you saw without a score?
Yeah. The soundtrack of life just made me think about how many notes are there in music? 12?
Yes.
Isn't it amazing with 12 notes the amount of soundtracks of life is created?
And that's the beauty of artists.
Yeah.
But people kind of just, that's the problem. People take it for granted and take for granted what these people do and the work they put in and how they roll up their sleeves and, everything they just leave out there. And, and I appreciate it. Man. So,
Well, you're doing the good work.
Uh-huh.
As we kind of land this plane of the conversation,
right.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you for one of your best Stephen and Craig stories from the Sony days. Stephen is one of the guys behind the podcast.
Stephen and I, we had a lot of good times at that label, but I think most of them are not for a podcast. I just want to be honest.
Okay.
Like I want to be honest. It's like we had some wild and crazy times at some shows and crazy stuff in the office, but it's just stuff that, I don't know if it's a podcast thing.
You know what? You said enough there in the way that, like, life, you have a big smile on your face. So I'm assuming you enjoyed your time with Stephen. And
Yes.
these are people that come in and out of our lives.
Yeah.
And we all have our version of those stories that make it full of color.
Yeah.
Not a mundane, boring life.
It
Living a good life's important.
was wild because when I met Steven, it was a second stint at Sony. So I'd worked for Sony in the 90s and I'd left and I came back in the mid 2000s and Steven was there and I'd met him for the first time and as you can tell, I do my thing, right? So I'm rocking around there and they're like, who is this guy just walking around? And Steven's like, I don't know how you're doing what you're doing. I said, you just do your thing, man. And it was just like, it'd be always like, a lot of times Steven would come over to me like, I don't know, how you doing this? I said, don't worry about it. But the fact of the matter is, he's a person that we became friends. And we've been friends beyond, and he's long left the music industry. Mm-hmm. But he's one of those people that, I keep in contact with. We hang. We're good. He's a genuine person, and that's what I'm about. I'm about genuine people. I'm about That's my whole thing.
Yeah,
my whole thing. Like, if you're fake, and I figure out you're fake, I'm not gonna have anything to do with you.
Yeah. Too many people in the world, hey?
Yeah.
What is a good life to you? If I said, Craig, what does a good life mean to you?
It's funny. A friend of mine, we were having coffee a week or two ago, and we were talking about life and what you want. And and I'm explaining to him what I want out of life, and I just, I want to work with good artists and do good things. I want to make enough to feed my family, but I don't want to have to chase, and he goes, and he said to me, he said, you want to go to bed easy and wake up excited.
Oh.
And that's exactly what I want to do. And that's, to me, that's like, if you can go to bed easy and wake up enthused and excited, I spent the majority of my career waking up enthused and excited. They'd have to tell me I had to take vacation time. The last 5 years, I couldn't get enough vacation time. Right? Like, what does that tell you?
Yeah.
So that's the goal.
Yeah.
That's the goal, and keep my integrity.
Integrity's a big thing.
Right.
And hearing your story, it does sound like you uphold that level of integrity.
It means so much to me. To a lot of people, it means nothing. But to me, it's
If you don't have your word, what do you have?
It's the only thing you can take with you.
Yeah.
Right? So, and people don't realize that. So, I'm not about false narratives and being fake. And so what you see is what you get. It's funny. I was talking to Cardinal. We're, Cardinal official. We're good friends. We've known each other forever. And anytime I call him, he goes, I know exactly what mood you're in from the tone in your voice.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't hide anything. And I go, I guess there goes being a professional poker player. But I found that as to be a great compliment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because they know I'm not going to be fake.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's a good place to be in.
Yeah.
If you were writing an autobiography of your life,
yeah,
and you had to write the next chapter,
right,
what do you think the title would be called?
Well, I put on something to quote, Dr. Dre, welcome to the next episode. It's just there, man. It's the next level in my story.
Yeah.
I am young street rep, young executive, young mid-level executive, older senior executive, dad. Started my own company. Going forward, the next episode, man. And that's it. That's all it is. It's because I'm not done. My series isn't canceled.
Wow, I'm not done. My series not canceled.
Yeah.
Okay, as we come to the close, what's the preview of the next series?
It's building my company to where it needs to be. It's working with good people and doing things that fulfill me and make money, but where I can go to sleep easy.
I love
and wake up enthusiastic. Yeah.
That is wonderful.
Yeah.
Going to bed with ease.
Yeah.
So my last two questions here. Over all the years and all these chapters that you just defined, if you had to just say a statement of what you think your relationship with money is, what would you say?
I'd say it could have been and should have been better coming up.
Yeah.
Later in life, I had to play a lot of catch up, but because I wasn't educated.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't educated. I was a young kid. I was making good money, just living. And it wasn't, until a good friend of mine said, hey man, he's like, how much money do you make a year? And I told him, he goes, what are you doing with that? And I was like, I don't know. I'm spending it. He's like, you want to, at least buy a place. And so that weekend, a friend of mine, he picked me up. We went driving around, found a spot, liked it, went in, put down a deposit, and I was able to build from that.
Yeah.
And I took my friend's advice, and I was able to get my loft, and then been able to get the equity out of that and reinvest that and blah blah blah. Like that's and that's from me listening to a friend.
Mm-hmm.
My family, they were renters their whole lives. My family, never owned a house. We lived in apartments. It was like you also don't think some of those things are attainable, which is wild to think about.
How that goes back to the rappers singing about it,
Yeah.
aspirational.
Yeah, the
I don't think
aspirational.
it's attainable, but all of a sudden it is.
And the reality for me was, I thought people who drove cars and lived in houses were rich. And I'm like, this. But when you're young and you don't know any better, like you just you think that way, and it keeps you in a mindset, and that's how come you're not.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. I remember when I was in college back in the day, I worked at the Hard Rock and the Sky Dome. So back then, the Bitovs owned the spot. And I remember one of the kids had a birthday party or something there, and I was working there, and I was just having, for some reason, he came up to me and was talking to me, and I said, "Hey man, how you doing?" And it's like, "Hey, it's my birthday, da 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 da." I don't even remember how old. He must have been 10 years old or something. And he said, I said, "Hey man, do you get a lot of gifts?" And I'm in my early 20s. And he goes, "Yeah, I got, this person gave me some money, blah, 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 blah." And I said, "So what are you going to buy?" He goes, "I'm going to invest it." He was like 12. And I'm like, but that just shows you from his lineage, what his family was teaching him. And that's how it starts.
Yeah.
It's you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
My son will have a better understanding of money than I ever did.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So
you know what I find really interesting about just exchanging stories, I think that's a bit of an art in and itself, is that I've talked to over 300 people on this podcast. I've talked to people who've been investing since they're 12, but they don't go to bed with ease still, even though, the Scrooge pot is big enough.
yeah.
And I think it's like, this is the funny, fickle thing about money is like,
Well, how much is enough? How much do you need?
Yeah.
How much do you like? It's like, yeah, you have the ability to make it, but if you're spending your whole life chasing it, how are you enjoying it?
you're not going to bed with ease.
You're not.
No.
You're not going to bed with ease. I think the guys I know who make money, that money is their lifestyle. I know a couple guys who trade for themselves and out their house. They just handle their own portfolio. And those guys have told me it was a lot easier for them. It's a lot easier for them to do that than work with other people's money.
Yeah.
Because when you're working with other people's money, you can't go to bed easy.
You can't. It's hard. Hard, and I love that thing, because what is a good life if I can't go to bed with ease and wake up excited?
Wake up excited and enthusiastic.
I really, really love your explanation of a good life.
Yeah.
All right.
Time, it's a finite thing. So as our time comes to an end, my last question, we've asked everyone. Let's imagine now you're at end of life. Doesn't matter how old you are.
Okay.
You're sitting on a front porch. Doesn't matter where. But you're looking out at a view that brings you complete peace, ease, and contentment. You decide to write one last chapter of that autobiography that your kid's going to read. What would that message be?
I made some mistakes, but my successes far outweigh my mistakes. And I'm satisfied and happy with what I was able to accomplish. The legacy for me is how my family and how my friends and then how this overall industry perceives me. You know, that to me means everything. And as long as I'd be like, yeah, I'd be like, I think I did okay. I hope, because I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
And I still think I got a lot more to do, but it would be, I think I did okay. You know, that's it.
Thank you for that and this fantastic conversation. I appreciate you sharing a piece of your story with us.
Anytime.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the You Potential podcast. That was such a fascinating conversation with Craig. The one thing that really stuck with me, amongst many things, but the one thing that I'm thinking about now is how his friends shared with him. You want to go to bed easy and wake up excited. What great advice. It feels like that's what I've been searching for or desiring in my own journey. And after 40 years of hearing his story, refusing to override his own voice, what Craig really wants to do in his life, in his work, I think it was wonderful to hear that story. This week, the question that I want to share with you is, are you going to bed easy and waking up excited? If so, way to go. If not, how, if at all, can we change that? Because sometimes it's not the answers we learn from, but the questions. Before you head off, I would love it if you could subscribe on this YouTube channel or wherever you listen to your podcast. Subscribe to the You Potential podcast. Take care, and we'll see you next week.